Hey, today I'm going to be discussing this thing that's on the screen right now. It says 9 Tricks to Avoid Fake News, apparently by Carl Sagan. So, I say apparently by Carl Sagan, and I think you'll see what I mean. Let me just read through this first, and then I'll get through the analysis. This is part of my Meme Whisperer series where I get different things online, memes and other things, and I just kind of break down and discuss and just give some thoughts of things that got to me about this. And first, let me say that I consider this to be a positive thing in general. Let me read through it and then get more into the discussion. Okay, so 9 Tricks to Avoid Fake News by Carl Sagan, and has 9 different circles with things in them. Find independent confirmation of facts. As I'm reading this, see if you can get what I might be getting at. If there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work. Use quantified data more than qualitative data. Don't get attached to your own hypothesis. Be skeptical of arguments made by authority. Always ask whether the hypothesis can be falsified. Consider either hypotheses. Debate all evidence and point of views. Occam's razor. Always choose the simpler hypothesis if there are two that explain the data equally well. And it says below here, info from curiosity.com and ASAP Science. Now, before I get into my analysis, there might be some things you picked up in there already that you might think I'm going to go to. But I think this is a good thing. I has mentioned that people are, in general, good. People want to be right. People want to be correct. In general, most people who fall for fake news, I've talked about how this isn't a new thing. In the past, people who even giving out the fake news didn't even get fake news. They just had limited information, limited amount of actually getting things out. Critical thinking is not as common as people think. Some people may think it is. Some of this information, people just think that, oh, if I hear this from this source, why would they lie? I trust this person because this person is defined as X, that they have done Y in order to make sure Z is correct. They trust that. That is what most people think. If you're in a certain location, your parent comes in and says, this is bad, you have enough trust with them to believe that that is actually a bad thing, without you personally going in and double checking every single thing your parent said this, because you have certain assumptions that that is a process you can trust. So I think that is something that happens. Now, when you have something like this, I've talked about this also in separate videos where it's like political bias, because I know I have these. I know I've had them a lot more in the past. I know I still have some today. I expect I will have many in the future, and I'm taking steps to kind of go and change these things around. I have videos on this channel. I have other things that I've released. I engage with people. Some things I have said that are wrong. Some things I'm trying to base on certain principles and basics. I just recently did a video talking about 11 political biases that I think was something useful. So even something like this is a step in a positive direction because it shows some people are trying to do this. Now, even when you are trying to overcome certain things, I think there's better ways to do things. Somebody may be like, I'm trying to get healthier physically. Somebody might be like, I'm going to do a crash diet where I'm having 500 calories a day and then I'm going to be walking 20 miles a day, versus somebody who's like, okay, I'm going to do something where I'm just going to drop to like maybe a 200 caloric deficit for 5 days out of the week. Then 2 days of the week I'll be at the regular one. Then I'm going to do like a 3 to 5 split of the workouts. And instead I'm going to aim for improving my health over 2 years, versus this person who's trying to just drop to a certain weight in 2 months without the actual understanding. So those two things, they can still get you to that same weight, but I would suggest the one where you have that 200 calorie deficit 5 days a week, and then you're at the regular level, and then you're expending your exercise to a certain habit of 3 to 5 days, would be something that is more healthy and more sustainable probably for your future. That's kind of something I would consider. So that's what I'm saying. So with this one, I think this has some of that crash diet kind of things with it, and I'll kind of break down just some of my thoughts on it. So find independent confirmation of facts. With that one, how are you defining the independent? Because in this one, some of the sources that people think are independent are not necessarily independent. And I've seen many situations where there'll be some flawed study or some certain study will come out, then one article will quote that study, and then other articles will quote that initial article, and then when you are reading that initial article with the actual study, you go to these other articles that have quoted from this first article, and it seems like multiple other articles are quoting this one article. So you must think like, oh, look, all these people actually studied and things like this and read the thing, and now they've agreed with this because they might have had separate sources to quote this article, when no, it's actually only that person who wrote that initial article that read a snippet from the actual report and placed that out there. And this is something that is even done in like psyops type of thing, like spies. Apparently they go and they plant certain stories to people in the media so they can be like, hey, look, these other people are saying this, so let's actually now go and do this as a government. That's actually done. That's, I mean, not be spies, but just some kind of things where they have those kind of relationships. So you're wondering, independent confirmation, first of all, go into actually searching and seeing, is this actually independent, and what are they actually confirming? What is the process that they're actually going to confirm this in? Okay, next one. If there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work. This one I think is rather realistic. I don't have much to say this one. If there's a chain of argument, if you actually have established that there actually is a chain, and that's one thing to actually be good at identifying, because sometimes it's two chains. It's this chain, and then they're like, hey, well, this chain ends here. Let's now jump to this other link on this other chain and see that. So just look at that connection. I think that's a positive one. Next one. Use quantified data more than qualitative data. Now with this one, I was wondering, why would they use quantified and then qualitative instead of quantitative and qualitative, or quantified and qualified? Why add that discrepancy there? And to me, that's a bit of an issue. This could just be semantics, but this to me raises some alarms. And this, when I read this, and I kept looking at this, I was like, wait, this is by Carl Sagan. Why Carl Sagan? And this might be jumping forward a bit, but be skeptical of arguments made for authority. Would Carl Sagan make this kind of slip up? I don't think Carl Sagan would have actually used qualified and quantitative in this sense, or this could be somebody misquoting him. So anyway, quantified is an adjective, an English adjective, meaning measured, or in logic used as a quantifier. And antonyms are non-quantified or unquantified. Now, quantitative is also an adjective of a measurement based on some quantity or number rather than on some quality. Chemistry, of a form of analysis that determines the amount of some element or compound in a sample. Related terms, quantity, quantitate. Derived terms, quantitative analysis, quantitative analyst, quantitative easing, quantitativeness, quantitative research. See also qualitative and quantitate. And you can see just from these descriptions, when you're talking about it in the sense of, I think, scientific research or data and things like this, they use quantitative rather than quantified. And that just raises up a question mark for me. Now, this is just might be me with my semantics, as I mentioned. But it lists here that as adjectives, the difference between quantified and quantitative is that quantified is measured, while quantitative is of a measurement based on some quantity or number rather than on some quality. As a verb, quantified is quantify. I'm mentioning again, could be semantics. But now just same here on Wikidiff, I went and said what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative. And it says here qualitative is a C also of quantitative, quantitative is a C also of qualitative. In context, chemistry, language, English, terms, difference between quantitative and qualitative is that quantitative is chemistry of a form of analysis that determines the amount of some element or compound in a sample, while qualitative is, in chemistry, of a form of analysis that yields the identity of a compound. As adjectives, the difference between quantitative and qualitative is that quantitative is a measurement based on some quantity or number rather than on some quality, while qualitative is of descriptions or distinctions based on some quality rather than on some quantity. I'm not going to belabor the point too much more, but I think this is important because with something like this, is somebody making an attempt to do better at absorbing information. So it stands to actually get, I think, as accurate information as possible. And I think just adding something like this, if I picked this up, maybe I'm just a weird person, but I think other people would pick this up, and it's best to use the actual terms because somebody might actually use this fake news thing and go back in and read it. And as I mentioned, I don't think Carl Sagan wrote this. Well, so when it comes back to things from SurveyMonkey, the difference between quantitative versus qualitative research, and I've done a separate video talking about specifically the scientific method, which I made a distinction between the scientific method and the faith or dogma religion that is the science. Now on to the reading, which is from SurveyMonkey, which is a place where you can go on, you can make surveys. Some of these things, when you try to get information, maybe I should make survey, like does the things on this thing, 9 things bother you as much as they bother me. But if you have certain questions and things, there's so many sources where you can make surveys and send these out. I don't know if you remember those things from back in the day when the internet was just starting and people used to send out these things of like hundreds of questions about those random things about people's lives and things like that in emails, and people would send them back or they would write them down, print them out, and I remember those things. And it was just basic things. But now that we have access to so much more in-depth and detailed surveys, so many people just take things for granted. Maybe they take it for granted and think other people have done those surveys, but you can do them yourselves and make them. So this is SurveyMonkey. They have a site where you can make surveys, and they're looking at, I guess, this is how to do it. So quantitative and qualitative research are complementary methods that you can combine in your surveys to get results that are both wide-reaching and deep. Simply put. Well, how am I reading put to pute? What is going on? Simply put, quantitative data gets you the numbers gets you the numbers to prove the broad general points of your research. Qualitative data brings you the details and the depth to understand their full implications. To get the best results from these methods in your surveys, it's important that you understand the differences between them. What's the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research? The definition of quantitative research, quantitative data, is designed to collect cold, hard facts, numbers. Quantitative data is structured and statistical. It provides support when you need to draw general conclusions from your research. The definition of qualitative research. Qualitative collects information that seeks to describe a topic more than measure it. Think of impressions, opinions, and views. A qualitative survey is less structured. It seeks to delve deep into the topic at hand to gain information about people's motivations, thinking, and attitudes. While this brings depth of understanding to your research questions, it also makes the results harder to analyze. So this goes into saying when to use qualitative versus quantitative, formulating hypotheses, validating your hypotheses, finding general answers, incorporating the human element, how to balance qualitative and quantitative research, giving examples here, then open-ended versus closed-ended questions. This is specific, as I said, for surveys, how to get qualitative data, interviews, case studies, expert opinions, etc. Why collect quantitative data, qualitative surveys, questions can run the risk of being too vague. So qualitative questions take longer to answer. Quantitative surveys are just more quantifiable, kind of like some kind of tautology there. Then give some examples of how to use qualitative and quantitative questions. So how long have you been a customer to our company? This is my first purchase, less than 6 months, 6 months to a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 or 4 years, 3 or more years. I've never made a purchase, and how likely you are to purchase the products again. And a qualitative follow-up question would be, do you have any other comments, questions, or concerns? Another example of quantitative question, when you make a mistake, how often does your supervisor respond constructively? Always, most of the time, about half the time. Once in a while, never. Then a qualitative question example is, what does your supervisor need to do to improve his or her performance? So that's it for the SurveyMonkey thing. Back to the thing. For example, I'd ask you, from these 9 tricks to avoid fake news, how often do you think you'd have used one of these in the last month if you knew about them at that time, if you had this sheet in front of you? And then you'd say the numbers, none, a couple of times, over this many times, unsure. And then the qualitative would be what is the actual quality? Can you actually say which ones do you think are the most important out of this thing? And then you'd start giving it more of an opinion, like, okay, yeah, this one is better. I think that one is more useful. This one isn't. So that's just my thoughts on that one. And with quantified, there is that thing where some people say the number of experts have done this thing. We have a preponderance of people who've said this one thing, so that thing must be true. They do that somewhat when it comes to quantitative. Instead of looking at the actual quality of the studies, like I can find you many scientific studies that would say, backed up by statistics and other things, to back up the assertion that Negroes are some sort of lower human beings. And then you go with the qualitative that, okay, now that they're lower, it's okay to own them. And then the qualitative can come with these things like, oh, even our gods and our religious books support this. They say, yeah, you can own people. This is okay. These are separate people, and this is more of the quality. So that's the feels thing, and you can tie in that with back. So I think with that one, there is something to get that extra, that extra kind of questioning, and they do get to these in these next points that I think we're going to move on to. But just keep in mind that raised a question mark for me. It might not have raised a question mark for you. That SurveyMonkey thing is something cool to check out. I shall leave links below so you can check that out as well. Okay, so do not get too attached to your hypothesis, to your own hypothesis. And the hypothesis one is repeated 3 times, which is kind of like the 10 Commandments, where some things just kind of repeated over and over again. I'm like, okay, well, what? Okay, so let me touch on the 3 of them together. Don't get attached to your own hypothesis. Yes, I think that in general is okay. Then always ask whether your hypothesis can be falsified. That is part of how not to get attached to it. Then consider other hypotheses. If you're not attached to your own hypothesis, chances are you're not attached because you've actually asked if it can be falsified. And then, if it can be falsified, you would consider other hypotheses. So I think those 3 could be put together. That's just a small peeve, but I think those 3 work together. And in general, I don't necessarily consider something bad about it. But then again, going back to the independent confirmation of facts and going back to the quantitative versus qualitative data, depending on those kind of evaluations you're making on those first 2 things, you might just go to somebody else who has a hypothesis that has similar interest to you, but you are not quite sure, or you think this is actually independent, you think this is actually separate from where you're coming from, but it's just somebody with a different way of wording the same kind of biases that you may personally have already. Now I'll go back to the one I skipped here when I was talking about the hypotheses ones. Be skeptical of arguments made by authority. Now, this one is something that I see often. Experts say this, experts say that. Are you an expert in this? Listen to the experts, listen to the scientists, listen to these people about this. This is something that we unfortunately do. And it's just about establishing authority. If authority is actually gained, and it's not just quantified in the sense that somebody has been given a certain number of degrees, a certain number of achievements, a certain quantity of X that you consider just that society tells you is valuable. Oh, I have this certain lived experience in this one thing. Because when it comes down to it, even if, as I mentioned, all these people give you all this data about how Negroes are lower human beings, and one person is coming out and saying, I don't think that's true, and they don't bring any actual information, then technically that one person could still be right. I could just say no. You could bring me, somebody could bring all this information, all the studies and all these things, and then make a claim about something, and let's be like, no, it's not right, and have nothing to back it up. Why are you saying that? I just don't think it's right. But where's your evidence? Don't have any. It's just not right. I could still be correct in saying that's not right. So there is something about this with the authority. Even authority figures, even people with valid actual reasons to be considered an authority on certain topics have been wrong about those things. And that is a magnificent thing about humanity, about just life in general. You could have some 5-year-old walk into a place and see something from a different angle than these people who've been studied in this field the entire time. And that 5-year-old be right and just revolutionize something. That might be a stretch or something. But there's this one thing I say, people say, oh, no, you don't, nobody, you know something like the back of your hand because you see the back of your hand all the time. But then there's something else that I noticed some time back. I first noticed it when I was watching some footage that my friend shot when we were at the Women's March in D.C. after President Donald J. Trump won his first term as president. And he had a GoPro and he was recording me from the back of my head. And I was like, oh, the back of my head's kind of sparse. Like the way I do my hair sometimes is like the spaces you can see down to my scalp. And I was just thinking, like, I've lived my entire life with the back of my head on my brain. So it's been something that's been on my mind for my entire life. Yet somebody who knows me for like a second, for maybe 10 seconds or a minute or so, that walks behind me might have a better idea of what the back of my head looks like than me, who's been living with that on my mind. So I took it, somebody who's just met you might have a better idea, better view on something that's been on your mind for your whole life. In the other sense, we're on your mind in the figurative sense that certain things that you dwell on and think about, by you dwelling on thinking about it for so long, can make you focused on certain things where you don't see something else, with somebody else coming in with a fresh point of view that doesn't have the possible biases, the possible luggage, the possible investment in looking at something in a certain way, can just be like, hey, have you thought of this in this way? So I think that's kind of cool. So sometimes it might be actual positive to go out and just get people without authority. So with that one, in general, I kind of agree with it. Okay, now debate all evidence and points of views. Now, for this one, it's more rather specific in this one. For this one, it depends. I've had situations where, as I've mentioned, I appreciate you taking your time to listen to these things. I really appreciate some of the conversations and interactions, even though sometimes it's very few people. We've got some regular commenters who I really value, get into back and forth. I get to know them. But I've started looking around, and some people are not honest actors, or in general, with the certain medium that you're discussing with them, there seems to be no point to really continue conversations when there seems to be an inability to communicate between each other. Some people, I'm wondering, are these person trolling, or do we just speak different languages? Are we just not understanding? Where you're like, if there's nobody else really witnessing, somebody would say like, okay, if you're having this argument about a certain topic, maybe someone else will come and see this discussion and it might benefit them, even though both of you, the two of people involved, or however people are involved in the actual discussion and argument, are probably not going to change their mind at that time. And that's happened to me, certainly. I've seen other things, other people discuss certain things where I was like, oh no, I used to be on one of these sides. If I was having this conversation with you, for example, about child abuse, about hitting kids as a good part of parenting, I would not be at the point where I could have a conversation that is effective, where I'm actually going to change my mind on it. But reading and watching and hearing several other people, countless, I can't really count how many people. I could count them, but right now I can't. I don't. It's not something that I can quantify. But the quality of these things came in over and over again to actually impress that point on me, that now I'm an ardent supporter of peaceful parenting. Now, to me, with peaceful parenting, I can't really, from what I understand about this, just the non-aggression principle and certain basics of it, there is no part in my mind that would that could make me think. I can't really think of any evidence that would make me think, yes, hitting children, like a kid does something wrong, and then I hit them, physically go and assault and yell at them in order to discipline and correct them from doing something wrong, be a positive part of parenting, versus finding other ways to communicate and understand why that kid either did not understand what they were doing was wrong, or I did not do enough to prevent that kid from doing that thing that was wrong, or I did not find a way to communicate before ahead of time, or there's other ways to do it without the hitting. So in that situation, I don't think there's actually something worth debating in a one-on-one basis. But if you're in an open situation where it's like, let's say on somebody's social media feed, and I think other people might read this, I normally feel I'll engage with somebody on this topic, because somebody else might come and see that, so there might be some certain thing. Now, all evidence, what kind of evidence would somebody be able to provide for that? Because they stopped doing it? Well, I can show you other ways for somebody to stop doing it. Points of views goes back to the qualitative thing, where it's like, okay, yeah, you can give me a point of view. Oh, I was hit, but then now that I was hit, I turned out good. Well, there's no other evidence. There's no other version of you in a universe that wasn't hit that you can bring and say, look, because I was hit now at that time, and now I turned out this way. Here was a version of me that one time wasn't hit, and then now that messed up their life. You can't. There's certain things where it's just a point of view where, as Hitchens' razor said, as if you see, go into the last Occam's razor, if something is asserted without evidence, it can also be dismissed without evidence. And there's certain topics and certain things where there's almost no evidence for it. Like certain things like rape, certain things like child abuse, certain things like murder. I'm talking about murder. I'm not talking about killing people. I'm talking about just murder. I'm not talking about a situation where somebody doesn't understand and somebody after time has like a regret type of situation. I'm talking about just outright rape, going in and physically assaulting someone. I'm not talking about something where it's like, oh, I was raised this kind of way. I was trying to actually help this person and I did something that ended up being abusive and now I've changed my mind. I'm talking about just understanding my main point of doing this is actually trying to harm and put harm towards this individual. That's the kind of abuse that I'm talking about in those situations. Those ones, I don't think it's worth debating. I don't think there's evidence that you can do. Your point of view on it, considering it positive, I consider it wrong, and have it that way. So there's no evidence for that. So the last one, as we're finishing this off, Occam's razor. Always choose the simpler hypothesis if there are two that explain the data equally well. Now with this, they what? And then you see here, info.curiosity.com, Curiosity.com, and ASAP Science. So somebody at ASAP Science or something went to Curiosity.com and got this information, and maybe Carl Sagan had said one or a few of these things and put them together. But this description of Occam's razor is not quite there. And Occam's razor is pretty straightforward. So I'm wondering, why would they go and put in this? And I have a suspicion of why, and I'll come back to that after we just read this from Britannica on Occam's razor. So Occam's razor, philosophy, is written by Brian Duignan. Alternative titles: Occam's razor with a H, Law of Economy, Law of Parsimony. Occam's razor, also spelled Occam's razor, also called Law of Economy or Law of Parsimony, principle stated by scholastic philosopher William of Occam, 1285 to 1347/49. Pluratis non est ponenda sine necessante, or plurality should not be posited without necessity. The principle gives precedence to simplicity. Of two competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. The principle is also expressed as entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. So it's saying here the principle was in fact invoked before Occam by Durandus of Saint Pourçain, a French Dominican theologian and philosopher of dubious orthodoxy. Dubious orthodoxy? What is dubious orthodoxy? Okay, so there's just 2 paragraphs here, so we'll just finish this off. Let's see if we can get this. It should be somewhat around 30-minute video. Thank you for listening, if you're still listening. So, coming to this thing. Okay, so a French Dominican theologian and philosopher of dubious orthodoxy. I want to call someone, hey, you are of dubious orthodoxy. Who used it to explain that abstraction is the apprehension of some real entity, such as the Aristotelian cognitive species, an active intellect, or a disposition, all of which he spurned as unnecessary. Likewise, in science, Nicole d'Oresme, a 14th century French physicist, invoked the law of economy, as did Galileo later in defending the simplest hypothesis of the heavens. Other later scientists stated similar simplifying laws and principles. Occam, however, mentioned the principle so frequently and employed it so sharply that it was called Occam's razor, also spelled Occam's razor, because his name was actually Ockham and not Occam, which is normally what you see with Occam's razor. He used it, that was me just giving a side, back to the reading. He used it, for instance, to dispense with relations, which he held to be nothing distinct from their foundation in things, with efficient causality, which he tended to view merely as regular succession, with motion, which is merely the reappearance of a thing in a different place, with psychological powers distinct from each mode of sense, and with the presence of ideas in the mind of the creator, which are merely creatures themselves. So that's it. And as you can see with Occam's razor, we don't know who the authority on Occam's razor is. It's called Occam's razor, so people would think, okay, Occam would be the one on it. But then with Occam's razor, Occam used it to think that the ideas in the mind of the creator are merely creatures themselves. Yet we know that's fake news. That's not true. With the hypotheses the person made, and who actually invented this? Who started with Occam's razor? It's called Occam's razor, so should we listen to the authorities? Britannica says this. But then you look at the thing. When did Occam even die? We don't even know these things. So the great thing that I'm saying about the time that we live in today is we have more access to information than we've ever had. We have things like SurveyMonkey that I was talking about, where you can make these surveys and you can get more research and information. The amount of people who are actually doing research, like Occam, who had access to time and resources to actually engage in some of the basic things that he had thought of, was so minuscule before current time. Yet you have this access. You can go out and you can find this information. You could probably find and make your own list of 9 tricks to avoid. And why tricks? That's another thing. The more I look at this thing, I'm like, this is not a trick. It shouldn't be a trick. What do you define as trick? But coming back to this Occam's razor, why do I think this was actually put in there? I think equally well. That term equal, as I mentioned, and I've mentioned before, equal is normally used in a quantitative and qualitative state. Yet I think it's only something that can be used in a quantitative kind of discussion, where you're talking about specifically things when you're talking about maths, measurements, simple basic things like that. But once you start going into qualitative, into experiences and saying, oh, we have an equal experience of this thing, we're not being treated in an equal way. What does that mean? How can you actually make an argument that 2 hypotheses explain data equally well? Now, if one is simpler, then it is not doing something in an equal way. And this is the law of economics. And I think economics go further than just like economics. When people think econ, even when I do this, and this is something that I'm breaking myself out of, is when somebody thinks econ, they just think money. They just think business. They just think of that kind of economy sense. Yet everything is a cost-benefit analysis. You put a cost-benefit analysis, and I appreciate you if you actually choose to listen to this far. You chose a cost-benefit analysis to say, I could spend these last 30 or so minutes, 30 plus minutes, we're probably coming close to 33 minutes of actually listening to Silas talk about this thing versus spending my time doing it with other things. You could have listened to it on 2 times speed, so you could have thought, my time is, I'd rather listen to this, but I'd rather put it faster so I can listen to it. Then you're down to maybe, what is it? I can't do math. You're around like 15 and a half minutes or something like that. But anyway, whatever. You're spending that time and you're making this cost-benefit analysis. So that's everywhere. So someone says, I can do this. I can get this resource from this person. I can spend this time with this person. So there is a different cost-benefit analysis. Somebody says, for me, doing this job has enough actual rewards to me that even though you can pay me the equal amount as this other person, we can get paid the same amount. Yet because I enjoy this job, because it's closer to my home, because I actually like seeing people enjoy the actual thing I'm doing here, that same salary you're giving me does not give me an equal quality of joy from it. So when you talk about equality equally well, this whole idea was like 2 different hypotheses can't be equally well in this sense. I don't understand equally well in this sense. I think what they're trying to get at is just saying like, okay, they did say it. They said simpler hypothesis already. It's kind of just like the explanation of how the universe has come to be coming down to like the I don't know type of things, but the things that we do know, that some people do know about it. For example, all the things make sense without a God. So adding a God that is a more complex being than any of these explanations that we have, where we're like, oh, we don't know what else is out there, but adding this being where you say, I might not be able to completely identify and show you evidence for the actual being, but my hypothesis of yours of just we don't know what else is out there, we're going to add this other being that is more complex probably than anything else that we don't know about or that we know about to be the explanatory of all the things that we don't know about. That just seems to be adding an extra step. But even someone with Occam's razor, he clearly had added that extra step into his actual life. And at least reportedly, at least the authorities say this. At least that is what is said. Because do we actually have confirmation from Occam that he truly believed this? Or was Occam somebody who was this intelligent enough to understand that to be a public figure in that current time, if you weren't out and saying something like that, they would kill you, or you just wouldn't get the stuff out. So there's just much to think about. So just thinking about this, I thought, again, the tricks I just picked up now, but there was other things that I had picked up as I was reading through this that I thought was worth actually making a video. And I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate you taking the time to come listen to this. I think it's good to understand and take in information, but understand some things are opinions. I don't go to a movie theater and sit there and watch a movie and think I'm going to get true, actual information about the world. I'll get information, I'll get people's ideas, I'll get certain stories being told that are still entertaining and valuable, and that happens. I recently will have released a video talking about Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow. They give opinions on things. I understand they're giving opinions from a certain point of view. Somebody had mentioned that, oh, at least Rachel Maddow and all these people say they're balanced, even though they're not actually balanced. But the person said, at least they say, and Fox doesn't say they're balanced. They just say they're conservative. So that makes, and I'm like, no. Let them say the information, and then you go, look, something happens. The Chaz Chop situation in Seattle happens. People take over that land, take over that location. You go to Rachel Maddow, and she covers how it's a peaceful thing, how it's a thing, how these people are frustrated. Tucker Carlson covers that same exact situation and says, oh, this is an armed thing. We need to get the military in there. We need to do this and this. This is just, I'm just saying this. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not quoting them directly here. This is just an example I'm giving. So they do that, and then you can still actually go there. You can actually you can watch live stream from people living in Chaz and actually get the information. You can go and get actual different sources, actual independent sources of people who are actually in there filming the location and actually get that. You can make your own hypotheses after hearing the hypothesis of what Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow say. You can go in there, and then now after time, we're seeing the amount of shootings, we're seeing the amount of violence, we're seeing the things that are related, we're seeing the claims that they're making. You're making more of a quantity of actual, there's more quantitative data coming in. You can actually do surveys and send those out. You can send them to people in Chaz with SurveyMonkey and actually try to see if they actually answer you with their qualitative answers about how they feel of what's going on there. You can see what the actual people are saying who actually live there, who are saying, we're suing the Seattle government. You can see that. You can see this change, this thing's waking up. Somebody says this is about Black Lives Matter. Then it turns out there's been 2 black deaths. All these black people have been shot there. And you're like, does that really make sense? You can debate different evidence and point of views in other locations on social media. You can do all these things. Be skeptical of the authority figures, both what the politicians are telling you about, like the Seattle mayor talking about, oh, it's just a summer of love. Be skeptical. First of all, is she an authority? An authority over what? Who is actually involved in this kind of thing? Should Trump be the actual authority to actually go in there and do something, or should it be the governor? Should it be, who is an authority in this kind of thing? What is going on in this situation? So all these things you can apply, and then you can avoid that fake news. You can avoid that false news. Because to me, actually, one thing that is even more dangerous than fake news is false news, is thinking you have actual real news and it not being real. Rather than it just being fake, where it's like, okay, like I don't that just sounds fake. Because I think when something sounds fake, it only spurns you to actually go out and actually try to actually find the real news. The false news is the one that's more difficult because you think it's real, and that kind of, I think, reduces your amount of actually going out and actually getting the information. Because if something is fake, when you actually try to act on it, I think you get the treatment immediately that this is actually not what's going to happen. This was advertised to be some kind of commune where we're going to actually come in and do XYZ, and when we actually get in this commune, this is not what's happening. That was fake news, man. And false news would more be you stay living in that community, the bad things are still happening, you're not being told anything about them, you're just being told, oh no, this person left because they shot themselves, not they were shot by someone else. That's not fake news. To me, that's false news. Or this person disappeared because they were just uncomfortable with this place, so they left. Instead of just saying, okay, no, that person was never here. You see the kind of difference I'm talking about here? Anyway, so that's it. That's it for now. Like, share, subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this. This is part of my meme whisper, this reading series or whatever. 9 tricks to avoid fake news by Carl Sagan. I'm not going to go check on curiosity.com, but if you do check and find out what the connection to Carl Sagan was, let me know in the comment section. Till next time, goodbye.